It all starts with this number, 200. Imagine that, 200 American soldiers marching south from Detroit back in August 1812. You know, their mission was supposed to be a walk in the park. Clear the road, get the supply lines back open, and show everyone who's boss. Pretty straightforward, right?
But waiting for them, hidden in the woods, was another number. 25. No, not 250, just 25 native warriors. I mean, think about that. They were outnumbered 8-1. So the real question isn't just if they could win, but how on earth could they even survive?
And that brings us to our final, and maybe most shocking number, 20. That's how many minutes it took. 20 minutes for that entire column of 200 soldiers to completely break, panic, and run for their lives. So for the rest of this explainer, we're going to dig into one simple question. How?
To really get how this happened, you kind of have to forget everything you've seen in movies about battles from this era. This wasn't a fight with neat lines of guys in bright uniforms trading shots. Nope, this was something far more primal, and, as it turns out, way more effective.
So, let's set the scene. It's August 1812, deep in the Michigan Territory. The Americans out there are, well, they're on edge. Their main outpost, Detroit, is totally cut off. No supplies are getting in, no messages are getting out. There's just this constant, nagging feeling of anxiety, this feeling that they're being watched from the trees. And that desperation, it forces the American commander, General William Hall, to do something. He has to get that supply line open, and he needs it done, like, yesterday. But this decision, well, it leads his men straight into an absolute nightmare.
So the job falls to a guy named Major Thomas Van Horn. He gets his orders, take about 200 men, a mix of Ohio militia and regulars, and march south towards a place called Brownstown. The objective? Clear out any resistance. You know, on paper, it looks like a textbook military operation.
And this is where we see the huge, fatal gap between what the Americans thought was happening and what was actually happening. They assumed, oh, we might run into a few scattered scouts, no big deal. The reality? They were marching single file into a perfectly planned kill zone, set up by a highly disciplined and coordinated force that was waiting for them.
So, let's flip the script and look at this from the other side of the trade line. This ambush wasn't some lucky, random encounter. No way. This was a work of strategic genius that used the environment itself as the main weapon.
And these guys weren't just random fighters either. They were warriors from several nations, the Wyandot, Shawnee, Ottawa, and Potawatomi, all part of this broader confederacy led by the legendary Shawnee leader Tecumseh. See, they weren't just fighting for the British. They were fighting to stop American expansion. They were fighting to protect their lands. For them, this was their war.
And their greatest weapon? It was the land itself. For the American soldiers, these thick woods and swampy grounds were just a pain, something to get through. But for the warriors, this terrain was the weapon. It gave them perfect cover. It created natural funnels that trapped the soldiers, and it made a traditional army formation completely useless.
Their plan was just a masterclass in this kind of warfare. Step 1, pick the perfect ground. Step 2, wait for that long enemy column to get all stretched out and vulnerable. Step 3, and this is so important, have the discipline to wait for the absolute perfect moment to strike. Then, Step 4, hit them with deadly precision, not just random shots. And finally, Step 5, use the chaos you've created to your advantage. Brilliant.
So as Major Van Horn's men push into this narrow path near the creek, they have no idea. They're totally blind. Every single step they take leads them deeper into the trap. The woods all around them are dead silent. And then, all of a sudden, they're not.
The attack starts with no warning. No battle cry, no big charge. Just the deafening crack of muskets exploding from positions nobody can see. And these aren't random shots. They're aimed with incredible accuracy right at the front of the column, at the officers, the leaders, to create instant, crippling confusion.
This quote really just sums up the American experience perfectly. In their minds, they weren't fighting 25 men. It felt like they were completely surrounded. Invisible enemies were firing from the left, from the right, from the front. They couldn't see a single target, just these little puffs of smoke that would appear and then vanish back into the trees.
And this is where the psychological battle was truly won. The American soldiers started firing wildly into the trees, just wasting ammo and giving away their own positions. The warriors, meanwhile, were firing with deadly precision, then moving, reloading, and staying completely invisible. In just a few minutes, that U.S. column went from being an army to just 200 terrified individuals.
And then, just like that, it was over. The Americans broke and ran, leaving behind their dead, their wounded, and their entire mission.
In about 20 minutes, a force of 200 trained soldiers was utterly shattered by a group that was less than an eighth of its size.
Now, the ambush itself might seem small, but its consequences? They were enormous. This wasn't just some minor skirmish out in the woods. It was a devastating psychological blow that had huge strategic ripple effects.
I mean, the numbers really speak for themselves. The Americans took about 30 casualties, 18 of them killed. And the native forces? Their losses were described as minimal, if there were any at all. It was a completely lopsided victory and a real testament to flawless tactical execution.
Strategically, this was an absolute catastrophe for the Americans. First, Detroit's lifeline was still cut. But maybe more importantly, that whole illusion of American military superiority on the frontier, it was shattered. This ambush was a massive warning sign, but General Hull just didn't get the message. In fact, it sowed so much fear and uncertainty that just a few weeks later, he surrendered the entire fort of Detroit without even putting up a fight.
Ultimately, what the ambush at Brownstown really shows us is the true nature of this conflict. For Tecumseh and his allies, this wasn't really about helping the British. This was a desperate, all-out fight for their very existence, for their land, for their way of life, and for their future in the face of this relentless American expansion. You know, in the end, the warriors at Brownstown didn't just fight in the forest. They fought with the forest. Their deep, intimate knowledge of the land, their incredible patience, their precision, it all proved to be more powerful than numbers, training, or anything the American army could bring to the fight.
And so we're left with this question, right? Brownstown provides a clear and pretty brutal answer. It proves that in the right environment and against an overconfident opponent, a small, intelligent, and disciplined force can win a victory so complete that it can change the entire course of a war.
The year was 1812. The United States had just declared war on Britain, fueled by anger over British ships stopping American vessels, and by fears that Britain was arming native nations in the Great Lakes.
We cannot endure these affronts any longer. The time for diplomacy has passed.
At the same time, native tribes were fighting for survival. After decades of losing land through treaties they never fully accepted, many rallied behind Tecumseh, the Shawnee leader who was building a native confederacy to resist American expansion.
Every season, stand with me. Stand for the future.
Detroit became a pressure point in the war. The Americans desperately needed to resupply Fort Detroit.
We must act now! And what of the native tribes? Are we prepared for the consequences?
But the forests and roads were crawling with British and native patrols. Every route was dangerous. Every movement needed scouting. The result was the Battle of Brownstown, a defeat so swift and so complete that it helped set the stage for the surrender of Detroit shortly afterward.